Hello, everyone. We are here with Michee Smith. Michee, thank you so much for being here today. Just to start things off, we are going to give a short introduction about you and your work. So, Michee studied at Rochester Institute of Technology, earning her computer science degree with a concentration on artificial intelligence.
From there, she got a job at Microsoft and is now working at Google in cloud security as a lead product manager. Once again, we are so excited to be talking with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
Thank you. So we're going to begin our questions now. Our first question for you is, what sparked your interest in the STEM industry?
Yeah, so that started probably when I was in, I believe it was high school. At the time, I thought I was going to be a lawyer, so I was doing mock trial. And I was like, oh yeah, this is the route for me. And then after doing that, I was like, this is not going to work. But I had always been kind of into computers. When I was in elementary school, I would grade the computer tests we would do for the teacher. And when I was in middle school, I would help friends out and family members on how to use the computer. And so in high school, I was like, you know what? Lawyer, mock trial thing isn't working out. It's not really where I can see myself doing this long term. So maybe I should start thinking about some kind of other major. And then the movie Hackers came out, and it had Angelina Jolie. And that was probably the first time I'd seen a woman in a role as a computer nerd. And it really resonated with me. And I was like, I want to go around on roller skates hacking. Hacking into companies and helping them make their security, better, their cybersecurity better. And so I started looking into different types of majors that I could have so I could learn those skills. And at the time, computer science came up. And so I was like, okay, that's what I'll major in when I go to college. And that's kind of how my STEM career got started.
Awesome. That's super cool. And starting from just your love of kind of playing around with computers and everything, and also seeing that representation, that's awesome. I guess then my next question for you would be, you started your career off at Microsoft. Could you tell us a little bit about your time there and describe your roles and positions?
Yeah, so I had two positions at Microsoft. So Microsoft was my first job out of college. The school I went to, you actually did have to work and do an internship in your major in order to graduate. So I had worked as a Java developer for a company called Westlaw for almost a year in order to graduate so that I could get those kind of work they call co-op credits. And then when I went to interview and look at Microsoft, I actually started there as what they call a software developer and test. And so we build the software, the systems that emulate the other systems that we have to connect with. So before the first time we connect with something like a bank's backend, I would create something that emulated that bank software to make sure that our systems were ready to go there. And at the time, this was really early cloud. So I had to build my own kind of private cloud to test everything out. So we would have 12 or 13 servers that we built out. I would write a whole bunch of software to test it out, and then sometimes work with the engineers to fix their bugs and develop more code for making sure the software was reliable. So that's where I started out in Microsoft. And about 4 or 5 years, probably about 2 years in, I decided I feel like I'm just too close to the end of the software lifecycle, and I wanted to be further up where more of the decisions were being made. Because as somebody who's testing the software, you kind of get to say customers are not going to like this, or customers are going to like this. You get the thumbs up and thumbs down because you're the last step before it goes to a customer. But sometimes I was like, customers will be okay, but you really shouldn't even did it this way. And I was like, I need to move up further in this software development life cycle so I can be the one that says it really should be this way. And that's kind of how I got more interested in program management and product management. And then we started my second career at Microsoft, which is program management. And I was looking at anti-piracy software. So back in the day, when you installed Microsoft Office or Windows, you had these 25 characters you had to enter into a box in order to activate it. Horrible experience. And if you don't have to do it today, that's because I worked really hard to get rid of it. But that was the way that we knew that you paid for the software. And so we would find that different places would do things to kind of get around that so that they wouldn't have to pay for the software, just not necessarily bad people, opportunists. Sometimes it was people who were trying to sell counterfeit software. And so I was working on software that helped people know, like, if they were running counterfeit software and what they could do to, like, actually activate it and make it genuine and make it their own experience. So that's kind of where I started off. That was my first kind of product management role. And then after doing that for a little while, Windows decided, like, we don't want to just do laptops and desktops anymore. We want to go into really small devices like phones and HoloLens, and we just want to be the operating system of choice for all these smaller devices. It's the broader space is called Internet of Things. And so I was tasked with figuring out how we could put Windows onto these smaller devices. And I did that. That was kind of the last thing I was doing at Microsoft until I think we launched HoloLens using that software that I built. And then after that, I got contacted by Google to come and work in privacy and do privacy product management. It was a brand new product management team, and they were just trying to build it up. And I thought, like, wow, this is a chance to come full circle. Like, I've always wanted to do security and privacy. This is a security and privacy team. I finally get to be that hacker I always wanted to be. And that's how I ended up at Google.
Nice. That's amazing. That's so cool. Like that you had, it seems like you kind of, went through a lot of different fields and stuff inside of Microsoft. So that's really cool to hear about.
Yeah. I think, sorry, Kate.
No, you can go.
I was just going to say, I think the transition between your positions at Microsoft was very interesting too, because you went into making more of the specific decisions rather than just the yes or no. I think that was interesting. And that also kind of goes into my next question, which is about your transition from Microsoft to Google. And you did talk about that a little bit, but I was just going to ask if you could talk more about your role in cloud security as a product manager, and if you could elaborate on what it means specifically to be a product manager, especially in the realm of security, and a little bit about how it contrasts with your positions at Microsoft.
Yeah. So a product manager at Google is kind of like they like to say a mini CEO, which is true. You end up being really independent. You work with a group of engineers, marketing people, user experience designers, researchers to bring a product together. And you do a lot of, like, looking forward to see, like, where the market's going, a lot of talking to customers to see what's their needs, and then trying to merge, like, the current technology we have, more investments into that technology with the needs that the customers have, and then where the market's going, so that you can kind of have a really compelling product story that keeps growing and people adopt and goes over the life cycle. So that's kind of like the main thing that you do as a product manager. So there's a lot of decisions on you. Some of the decisions are like, what's going to be in the first iteration of this product, right? How do you scope it down? And so, your engineers are expecting that you've done the research with the customers and that you understand the market enough to know what that right scope is, because their responsibility to tell you, like, this is how we're going to meet that scope. This is the design that's going to allow for this scope, as well as make it easier to expand the scope later. So that's kind of the upfront decision making that I wanted, but a little scary because you're making the decision. So that's been a really cool thing. And as I would say, at Google, what's really nice is that there's a lot of autonomy between the engineers and product managers to actually just do great things. Like, if you think that there's something that can help the customer, and you guys are all excited about it, and of course, if it makes good business sense, you can just go and run with it, present the idea, and make it happen. Where sometimes in, like, older companies who have a lot more legacy, it may be more about, like, what's the bottom line? Is this going to move the bottom line by $50 million or not? Right? Which is, like, sometimes that means there's things you can't do for customers to delight them that you want to do, because you got to do the other things. But that's one thing that I really enjoyed about Google. Now, transitioning from Microsoft to Google, I would say, like, the the engineers and the people you work with, like I still work with amazing engineers and people and just really smart people in both places. So that was really nice. You know, sometimes a little bit of imposter syndrome can set in. It's like, I'm at Microsoft, I'm at Google, but you know, hopefully I'm as smart as they are. Actually, I know I am. But anyway, so that hasn't really changed a lot. There's different company, I would say, personalities between differences between the two. There used to be a really funny meme online, and it was like the organization chart of Microsoft, and it's really clear and like really concise, and then it was like the organization chart of like Apple, and then there's like people pointing things and weapons like they're fighting each other, and then it was like the organization chart of Google, and it's like spaghetti strings and all over the place. And that definitely was something that I experienced when I came to Google. I was like, who makes decisions here and how org set up? But it's like, and then they say like dealing with ambiguity should be a really good skill. And it's like, yes, because the org chart was a little ambiguous when I came. So I can understand why you want that to be a skill. But so things like that can be just the personality of the companies are different. And like Microsoft had a really big enterprise focus, where Google was it still is a really big consumer company. But now I work in Google Cloud, which is trying to really focus on enterprises. And so I'm learning that I could take the stuff that I already learned in Microsoft around enterprises and bring it to Google. So that's been helpful, that I already had that experience. So working with enterprises wasn't as shocking as some of the people who were here at Google.
Nice. That's super cool. It's interesting. Like I don't really understand the tech world in general, so it's cool to like kind of hear that overview and figure out how things kind of fit together. But you kind of talked about security and privacy as well. So could you talk about the importance of security and privacy in our increasingly digital world, and like what goals you have for security and privacy for the future?
Yeah. So you can't have privacy without security. And why is that? Because security is about the systems, right? Security has been around since ancient times, right? Since people have had secrets, we've had security. Right? If you had to send a letter to somebody and you didn't want to make sure that letter, if it got intercepted, nobody could understand, we had like ciphers and things to like interpret it so they couldn't see it, right? They did that in World War II. So as long as we've had secrets, we've had the notion of security. And that's what security is about. It's about making sure that the systems that transport your data and your information are kept away from people who are not supposed to see it, right? So no unauthorized disclosures. How do you protect that information? How do you make sure you don't lose it? How do you make sure it's not changed? So if you send an email to one of your friends, you want that words in those emails to show up. You don't want somebody to come in there in the middle and take that information and change it around, and then now you've lost a friend for no reason, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's security. The systems do the right things to make sure that the data, when it arrives, it was the way it was originally sent, and the only people who see it are the people who are supposed to see it, right? So privacy depends on security, because privacy says not only are only the people who see it are the people who are supposed to see it, but it also says, which is why you need security, but it also says it's only being used in the way in which I authorized it to be used, right? And so you take a picture and you send it to your friend. Security makes sure that only your friend gets it, right? And privacy is like, yes, only my friend gets it. But if that friend then goes and takes that picture and uses it to make memes of you and to embarrass you, you have felt like they violated your privacy, right? Because they're using your data in a way that you didn't expect them to use it, right? And so that's what happened. That's like the big thing that people are awakening to now. Before, everything was like security breach, which is some outsider or some insider has gotten to a company's data. They've gotten to bank data. They've gotten to this data they're not supposed to. Now the question is like, I think you guys may have heard of the Facebook incident called Cambridge Analytica. But in that case, it was no security breach. But people didn't know that if they did this little Facebook game, that would go into research that would later go to support support the Trump campaign. And they were like, whoa, I didn't know that that's what I authorized. Right? Right. And so it wasn't like there was a security breach. It's just like your data, you were using my data in a way I didn't expect it to be used. And so that's a lot. That's the, like, those are the big differences between security and privacy, but you can't have privacy without security, but privacy is a little bit more than just security. It's also how are you using the data. And so my long-term vision for security and privacy is to make it not be so much on the user to get security and privacy right. So today we tell you set the right settings, you know, when you send your messages or when you set up your account so that you can have privacy. We also tell you set a strong password, and now we're telling you use a password manager because we know people can't set strong passwords. Right? Let us generate one for you and let us manage it for you. So we're constantly trying to evolve, but like the key thing is people can't be responsible for the security and privacy of their data. There has to be some kind of onus on companies to also help you, right? And we don't want you to be the front line. In my opinion, people should be the last line of defense when it comes to security and privacy, not the first line. And so that means that up front, when you design it, you should think of what can I do while I'm designing this software to make it super easy for people to get the right security defaults, the right privacy defaults. I imagine a world where you could like create a profile of yourself and say like, this is what I care about it from a security and privacy perspective. And any app that I use always adheres to that. So I don't have to say like, did I set the right permissions in Facebook? Did I set the right permissions in Instagram? Did I set the right permissions in Snapchat? I don't want to figure out all of this. I just want to say, this is what I care about. Everybody do this, right? That's, to me, that's a really good privacy world. And then from a security perspective, like the more we can make security natural to people. Like I love the face, like I could just look at something and it unlocks my laptop, or fingerprints and things like that. The more we can make it natural to us so that we don't have to memorize 10, 20 character passwords and like, what was my password for this site and this site and this site? And password managers are helping there, but like the more we can do, I think with biometrics to integrate that, that's really interesting to make security better and make sure we know the identity of the person who's trying to access that data so we can know that they can have it or not.
Awesome.
Great. And I think it's really cool. And I specifically, how you explain the difference between security and privacy, I kind of use those interchangeably. So it's interesting.
I do the same. So yeah, that's super cool. And I like the world in which we get to do less.
Right. Yeah. So the world in which you get to do less means that developers do more, but they're paying to do more. You're getting paid to do more. But I also think that means like as companies that create APIs and development frameworks that developers use, we should put more of that into our frameworks so that it's easier for developers as well. So like if you make it easy for developers to do the privacy conscious thing by default, then they're just going to do it, right? But when they have to jump through hoops to build it, then sometimes it doesn't get put in there, and then that ends up being a disservice to the users like yourselves. So I do think like the people who are building these development frameworks, there's responsibility for us to make it easy for the developers, and then developers will do the right thing by default, and then you will get a good privacy experience.
Yay. Yeah. Awesome. That's super cool to hear about.
So this next question is kind of going back into something we've already talked about. But it was really interesting to hear that you went from wanting to be a lawyer to want to go into the STEM field, because I recently had that same exact switch this year. I wanted to go into law, and then I was like, no, I think I want to have some leadership role in STEM. And so since I want to go into a leadership role in STEM after college, could you talk a little bit about your proudest moments and accomplishments throughout your career?
Oh. So one moment sticks out in particular. So like I said, I wanted to be a lawyer, but I never became one. Well, this one particular moment like combined all the things that I love. So like the things I loved about law and the things I love about tech. And it was this product that I worked on called the Google Transparency Report. So back in 2016, the Russians meddled in the US elections.
Oh, yeah.
And as part of that meddling, they actually tried to set up fake US accounts that showed that appeared as like political parties
Yeah.
or political organizations in the US.
Mhm.
And they set up these fake accounts and they used advertising systems across multiple platforms to send messages and advertisements to people and tried to kind of incite issues. So they would send like Black Lives Matter advertisements, and they weren't even part of Black Lives Matter, or they would send these like right-wing advertisements to like get everybody and amped up, right? So they did all of these things that, I mean, it was horrible. They just tried to really take advantage of our political system. And the question that came from the federal government was like, what can tech companies do to make sure this never happens again?
Mhm.
And at the time, I was the product manager of the Google Transparency Report. And a couple of us got together on the policy side and the lawyer side with me on the tech side. And we were like, can we create a report that can show like anytime somebody purchases an ad, a political ad on our system, that will just be like available to the public, to advocacy organizations, and they can just look like, you know, if some particular advertiser doesn't seem, you know, right, like there's something wrong with them, everybody in the public will have that information and they can look and see like, hey Google, you should really check out this person. Like, we're going to do our due diligence as Google to check them out, but if for some reason we miss it, there's transparency and you can see for yourself if we were, you know, allowing an advertiser who shouldn't have been just do political reports. And so that was an amazing opportunity to work on that, because it sat right in the middle of technology, security and privacy and misinformation and public policy and law. Like, all of these things came together in one product. And I felt really good because like that was a lot of transparency, and it could easily backfire. And it could easily backfire because you could accidentally have a political ad show up that probably shouldn't have shown up, right? And it would be out there for everybody to see. But I love that we took that risk, because we felt like it was more important to citizens and to democracy to have that transparency and to make sure that when they hear voices, they're hearing the voices of the real people who are running for that office versus the voices of somebody who's trying to, you know, pretend to be them and put misinformation out there. So that to me was like one of the proudest moments. It was hard. We had to convince advertisers that they should be okay with us putting information out there about them, right? We had to work with advocacy organizations who wanted way more information than we even could provide, because it's like data quality issues. And it's like, oh, we would love to give you that information, but do you understand how much data we have to sift through and get right to give you that? Like, can this be enough, right? And so nobody was happy on either side, but people were okay, right, in general. And then we did the right thing, I think, because I think at the time Facebook and maybe even Twitter had launched they had launched a repository, just a database of all the ads. And we didn't want to go out that way because we felt like that would be really hard to consume, and like only researchers would be able to sift through it and make it usable and user friendly. So we went out with the database as well as an aggregated report. So you could just like come to a report and understand overall the story the data is telling. And then if you wanted to go into the details, you could go into the database and see the actual ads and see information about each individual ad. And we also had an API available so that the researchers who wanted to do it, it could be super easy for them. They didn't have to build something on top of what we had. So the launch landed really well, and it was like a really exciting moment for me. And I was like, yes, I've done something for democracy. Like, I never knew that I would have a chance in my career to do that, but that was really cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. Just like all those intersections of, you know, like you said, democracy and leadership and tech. Like, I think that's so cool that all of those could kind of come together in that moment. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. I guess my next question kind of revolves around representation in the tech world. So especially from your perspective as a Black woman in the STEM field and like in a leadership role, with, you know, there's being statistically less women and Black people in the industry, how has this kind of affected your experience working at tech companies, especially as a product manager?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways in which it impacts your experiences. And I talk a lot about this in the article that I did recently for Moguldom Nation. But one way is like people have biases
Mm.
about you, and a lot of times it's unconscious biases. And so sometimes I have to kind of figure out, and this I think maybe mostly because of me being Black than a woman, but like sometimes I have to work a little harder to figure out like what they've assumed about me that may not be helpful. Right. Like I remember like there was a time when if the microwave broke in the kitchen, people would be like, Michee, isn't that so ghetto? And I'm like, am I the foremost authority on ghetto-ness? Like, I don't know why you're asking me. I'm like, it's broken. It's an inconvenience. Is it ghetto? I don't know, right? Like, now I did come up from a poor background, but I still just felt weird that you thought that I was the right person to ask about that, right? And so like those kind of like unconscious biases where people may be scared to say things to you, or they say things that don't really make sense. You're not sure how that's going to play out later, like in communication, and if it's your manager who feels like that, like in a career perspective, because one of the things that they've learned, and there's research about this with women, a lot of times managers, especially male managers, won't put them up for positions that they think like they need to grow to really be effective in, or like they're almost there but not quite, because they don't want them to fail, right? They're so invested in them being good, like they just won't give them those challenging assignments where it's like when it comes to men, they're like, okay, he'll rise to the occasion.
Right.
And so things like those kind of biases can really be hurtful or harmful. The other thing is so those are ways that things impact you. The other thing that could impact women that I've seen is like women tend not to apply for positions that they don't feel like they meet at least 80% of the job description, but where men will meet like 40% and still apply for the job, right? And so like thinking about how you describe jobs when you're trying to hire people and things like that, you have to think about that even differently, so that you can make sure that you really have the things that you really need, so that you don't discourage women from applying. So there's things about who women are and what we tend to do, and then there's things like unconscious biases in the workplace that can be hurtful. So between both of those, like, it's incumbent on organizations to understand it, to change hiring processes, to change company culture, to train managers, right, to work in an inclusive environment and understand the things that could harm. I remember I was at a conference for my job recently, and one male manager was in his hotel room, and the other male manager was like, hey, I want to talk about this thing. And a male manager was like, yeah, just come up to my hotel room and we could talk about it. And then the other male manager told him, no, I'm not going to do that, because if I was a woman, I wouldn't be able to come up to your room and have this work conversation. Like, can you meet me down at a bar? And I was like, that just like having just him doing that is just so powerful, because it sets an expectation like, yeah, these types of things that happen, women wouldn't be able to be included in that. So it's really important to have something that spans, that's inclusive. Like, even if you're having these side conversations, think about how you can be inclusive around those. In terms of representation, it's getting better. I don't think it's fast enough, but I do think it is getting better for women. I think for a lot of people of color, it's still extremely low. But for women, I'm seeing more women in tech. It was funny because we launched a product the other day, and like all of us working on it were women, and it was like one person who was a man. It was like, yo, wow, like when do you get to have this experience? Like the engineer is a woman, the product manager is a woman, the program manager is a woman, and we're like, oh, this is cool. So I can definitely feel like that's getting better. And to me, the more you have women in leadership, then the more you'll see that happen, right? Because then we'll purposefully like say, hey, give me more. I want to see women. I want men and women in the pipeline, not just men all the time. And then for like minorities, I haven't had the time to really investigate what's going wrong. There's a lot of thoughts around pipeline to get the representation better. There's a lot of thoughts around retention to get the representation better. So like, how do we make sure that minorities in tech stay in the company? There's a lot of thoughts about like the locations. So like Black people are like in 20, 30 cities in high numbers across the country. One of those cities is not Silicon Valley, right? So if you're building all these tech companies in Silicon Valley, it doesn't have a lot of Black people there, then you're not going to get a lot of Black people there because they're not going to leave their families in other cities a lot of times to come work. So like, do we think about growing tech companies in other locations to make it easier to have better representation? So there's a lot of thoughts and theories on what's going to happen. In my opinion, you got to set a goal and hold people accountable to it. Like your bonus or whatever incentive structure you have has to be tied to that, or people are not going to really do the work and have enough motivation to actually fix the problem.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think like almost going back to what you were talking about in the beginning with, you know, the Hackers movie coming out and seeing that representation, like I guess as like a female in, you know, a computer science, like in the computer science field, like I think that's kind of emblematic of like what like the importance of representation as well, like how much you need to kind of like see yourself and like be able to understand that you are capable of being there, like other women, other people of color are doing it as well. And so I think that's I like thank you for sharing like your story with all of that.
Absolutely. I think people underestimate the sense of belonging.
Mhm.
Right. Belonging is in every aspect of our lives, not just our families, not just with our friends, even in the workplace, but you spend a lot more time there than when you get older and you're working, you spend a lot more time in the workplace than you will with even your family sometime. In that sense of belonging and looking around and never seeing yourself, that can be hard. And I think people underestimate it sometimes. So yes, representation is important.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about the connection when you were speaking, and I also started thinking about my own biases, especially when you said, you know, the two managers that one male invited the other male to his room, and it was just one of the things I wouldn't have even like considered that, you know, that kind of restricts females. Like that's not something that they could have done, but it's not something I'm consciously thinking about, and I'm just
Right.
these things. I think it's interesting. So
Yeah.
So you already spoke a lot about this, but if there's any other ways that you want to talk about how race and gender has impacted your experience in this industry, it doesn't have to be specific to Google or being a product manager, just being maybe your education or in your career that you'd like to highlight. That'd be great.
So one of the things that was really interesting, especially when I was an engineer, but this was a long time ago because I've been in this industry now for 17 years. But one of the things that was really interesting when I first started in my career was like, because I was so different from everybody else, it's like I had hyper attention on me. And it was both good and bad. So sometimes when I like in a bad sense, it's like I didn't want to speak unless I knew I had something really good to say. Where a lot of people would like +1 people all the time, like, yeah, just, and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to say nothing unless I have something different and really important to say. I'm not going to just add on to something someone already said. So that was kind of probably the bad part, because I think a lot of people just expect you to just like say, yes, I agree, or no, I don't agree. But the other thing that was nice was like when I talked, everybody listened. It's because I look so different. So I felt like in the early parts of my career, because there's this thing called mansplaining. I don't know if you guys heard of it, where a woman says something and then a man will go back and say the exact same thing, but like in man talk, right? And it's like, I just said that. I didn't actually have a lot of that early in my career. It was like, I talked to people like, yes, what Michee said makes sense. And I kind of got known as like, when Michee talks, you listen to her. And I think some of that was because like, I was just so different than everybody else I was working with at the time. The other thing though that was annoying but nice as well was that like when other women would join a team, especially Black women, people would always make sure that we got connected. And so like one example was when I first started, I was like the only college hire that was Black and female, but an intern had been on the team like the year before. And so when she came back, they were like, when they found out she was coming back, they were like, oh, you're going to love Sierra. Oh, I don't know if I should say her name. Oh, you're going to love this person. She's great. And I mean, so many people on the team kept telling me that. And I was like, why are they so sure I'm going to love this person? And then like when we first saw each other, we were like, oh, we're both Black and female. Like they just made an assumption that because we were both Black and female, we would love each other. But they ended up being right. Like we're like best friends to this day.
That's so great.
It's like, I don't even know if we would have been connected if it wasn't for the fact that they just like really forced us to connect. But at the same time, it was like, oh, I'm really glad you did that, because we were able to like deal with different issues that we faced around being women and Black together. And so it really helped us like really stay in this career. And now she's doing wonderful things in Xbox, right? And she's just like has a really great career. And like we were able to support each other early in our careers and, you know, build a friendship. And we both were like out of towners, so we didn't know a lot of people there. So it ended up being great. It was a little annoying that they assumed that we would be friends, but it ended up being like a blessing.
That totally makes sense. And so I guess that kind of like ties into my next question a little bit. Like, do you have any strategies? Like, it sounds like having some connections, like support systems in a sense is kind of like a strategy, but like, do you have any other strategies you use to overcome those microaggressions and biases that you experience in the workforce?
Oh yeah. So this is a strategy that I use, and I don't know if this is more just because I'm a Christian and I'm just taught to love people and think the best of people. By default, when people do stuff like that to me, I don't go into this mode of like, you are personally trying to attack me or you don't like me or something like that. And because I don't have that like natural inclination to do that, it puts me in a place where I can actually, you know, treat them as somebody who's just not educated, right? And have a really rational conversation about like how this can be harmful and how this can be done better. And so like that, you know, I don't know if I purposefully built that strategy, but it's just a strategy that I have. I just love to think the best of people all the time. And so when it happens, it's like, you have to, you know, if I can have a really good, and we can have a really, open and honest conversation. And that's another thing about me. I'm a lot more vulnerable, I would say, than other people. Not because I love it so much, but just because I think it's important to have like the kind of working together in a trustful way environment that I think makes you work better together. So that's one thing that I do a lot. Like I just think the best of people and I try to be vulnerable so we can have this open, trusting environment. The other thing that I do is I keep like, I tell people all the time, I have 3 relationships going at all times. I have somebody who's mentoring me, and oftentimes I have multiple mentors for different things, right? And I try to make sure that my mentors are diverse. I have female mentors, I have people of color as mentors, I definitely have white male mentors. Like I try to have a lot of variety and diversity so that I can understand like the different thoughts and the different perspectives. And then I also have my peers who are just like, I want to just like complain to, just build each other up and support each other. I keep those kind of peer mentoring relationships as well. And then I have people that I'm mentoring because they're facing different things. Sometimes they're facing things that I actually went through. Other times it's different things. And it's like, oh, this is an interesting challenge. You know, I would love to help you move forward in your career or overcome this challenge and maybe learn, like, did this work? So I can tell somebody else, or if I encounter it, I can leverage it, right? So having those 3 relationships, in my opinion, has allowed me to be very successful in my career. And oftentimes the people who mentored me have also become advocates for me. So what's the difference between a mentor and an advocate? So a mentor uses their experiences to tell you how you can do something better and how you can get to where you want to be. An advocate is somebody who can talk about you when you're not in the room and get other people to influence other people and make them see you in a better light, right? And so a lot of times having those mentoring relationships also led to advocacy for me and people who would speak for me when I wasn't around. So that's another strategy that I employ. And then the other thing, I want to dig a little bit deeper into that thing that I said about trust. So there was a study done that said people will always go to the people that they like for help versus the person who's most knowledgeable if they don't like them. And that really stuck with me because I was like, if I'm an expert in my field, but I'm a butthole, I might be in a situation where we're working really slowly and we're not moving forward because people just don't want to talk to me, right? And so I had always resolved in my mind to just like be the easiest person to work with, really make people feel welcome and inclusive, and not necessarily because like I think this is this is like I'm a loving, open, warm person. I'm very outgoing, but I'm actually an introvert. Like when I come home, I try to get my kids out the room. I want to be by myself. But like, so it's not because I'm just like naturally this warm extrovert. It's really because I want to work at the speed of trust. Like I don't want to have to wait until you told somebody else and they told somebody else and finally gets back to me that this is a problem. I want you to feel okay coming directly to me. And I think we work faster and better in those types of environments. So that's another strategy that I use, right? Because, I think that helps get past microaggressions. Sometimes people just say, like, Michee, I feel like I can just say this to you. And people laugh because they're like, people always come to you, Michee, and just tell you everything. And I'm like, yeah, sometimes it can be overwhelming. And I was like, so I do have to like have a filter, like, okay, all of this is not important. This is the important thing. But it's like, I'd rather have that than people never coming and telling me what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that also is really emblematic just of like your leadership ability and like why you're holding these leadership positions that you progress through your career. Because I think, yeah, you're totally right about trust. And like with that trust, you just can be such a good leader and such an inclusive leader to everyone that's following you.
Yeah.
Right. I was going to say, I feel like it's very admirable and like selfless because it's for the better of the company and for your progression, the company's progression. And I think having that open, trusting relationship with those three relationships that you establish, I think it's a very great strategy. So this is my next question is with all of the current events, such as the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent protests, there seems to be a heightened sense of activism and action around the Black Lives Matter movement, whether this be through local governments or larger companies or organizations. This is, of course, a complicated question and subject matter, but for you, are there any steps that you hope to see the tech world take in addressing issues of systemic racism and even sexism?
Absolutely. So I think the biggest thing, what I've seen most tech companies do is say we're standing with the Black community. And now they're just starting to wake up to like put it inside of their products. Like I turned on Amazon Prime the other day and it was like Black Lives Matter, or I went to Netflix and it was like Black Lives Matter. Have this look at this collection of documentaries.
Yeah.
And so like that kind of infusing it and normalizing it in products, I think is a great step. I think going to the root of it and being willing to call out the root of what's causing these things is also important. Ben and Jerry's, which is not a tech company, I thought took the most interesting stance. They didn't say like, I'm standing with the Black community. They said, stomp out white supremacy, right? They were very clear, like this is the root source. And these are the things that we have to do to kill it at the root, right? And it's not about standing with the Black community. This is a societal problem in our society. We don't like it and we're going to stop it, right? And I think that's the kind of message that companies need to send to their employees. Is like, hey, we recognize that this is a society problem. It's not a Black community problem. It's a problem of our American society that is negatively impacting the Black community. And we're going to do our part to stop it. Right? We're going to address the fact that we don't have enough representation in our own companies. We're going to start thinking about how we do investments. What schools do we invest in? Like we're going to look at HBCUs, right? We're going to look at those types of things. We're going to try to invest in this community, right? Because we may be doing things systemically that we haven't even realized just because it was comfortable and it got it to our goals the fastest, right? And so I think those types of steps that we're starting to see tech companies do is going to be really important. The other thing is like over policing in people of color communities typically it's because there's a lot of poor communities,
Yes.
right? It's in any poor community, you're going to see more crime, period. Doesn't matter what race they are, you're going to see more crime, right? And so the more we can do to focus on poor communities of any race, and invest in those communities and start addressing the wealth income gap,
Yes.
right, then I think that's going to be hugely important. Part of the wealth income gap is from tech companies, like whether they want to say it or not, but like the Google employees, right, and all these tech companies in Silicon Valley, like if you look at what happened, basically it became unaffordable. Like you work at a grocery store in Silicon Valley, I don't know how you pay for a house, right? Like it's the average cost of a house is $1.2 million. So you can't have like regular jobs that are not in tech and live and have a good life out there. It's really difficult, right? And so we have to think about like what is our responsibility in the wealth income gap, right? And start trying to address that, because that lowers crime, that will lower over policing, like that will also start to address some of these other issues. The issue, most people think that what's going to solve this problem is a heart change, and the truth is, like the people who are police right now who are racist, it's going to be very difficult to change their hearts, right? They kind of grew up in this, like this is something that they resort to when they're in fear. It's going to be really hard to change their hearts. We can change the hearts and minds of the next generation, of your generation, but changing their hearts and minds is going to be really hard. So what we have to do is we have to support laws that stop it, right? Like qualified immunity that allows you to get away with civil rights violations, right? Even when you murder somebody who's unarmed, has to go, right? And tech companies should support those laws, right? They should support things that say this is how police, these are helpful practices for police, like the Promise Obama's, I think it's called My Brother's Keepers organization. They have something called 8 Can't Wait, and it's 8 reforms that police departments can do all across the country to like reduce the amount of over policing or police brutality for people of color. So just like pushing those things and supporting those things and lobbying for those things, tech companies can do that because those are real sensible things that most of your users will not turn on you for supporting, right? And so I think they can do things like that, because we're not going to be able to change hearts and minds of the people who already have those deep-seated feelings, but we can say like we're going to hold you accountable when you do something that's not aligned with our values as a society. And I think the reason why this Black Lives Matter moment was so much bigger than previous ones is, one, we're in the pandemic, we're all stuck in the house. It's like in your face, right? You can't get away from it because it's on social media, it's on the news, right? So it's in your face. And when it was in everybody's face, you know, they couldn't be like, oh no, those before issues were one-off moments and random moments. They're like, no, this is a systemic problem. And I think the society has changed enough that they cared that it was a systemic problem. Back in the 50s and the civil rights movement, they didn't care that they would not care that this was a systemic problem. But we have matured and grown so much as a society that we care that this is a systemic problem. There were Amish people marching and doing Black Lives Matter. Like this entire society cares. There were people globally marching and saying, hey, US, you cannot hold other people accountable for human rights violations when you have a major human rights violation happening in your own country, right? And so I think society has also matured on this issue, and that's why we also see such a big moment right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think I've thought about it from like, you know, just this systemic viewpoint, but specifically looking at it from the tech world and just the power that the tech world holds, like even globally. Like I think that it's also like it's up to those big industries and big fields also to share the importance of this movement and also make policy changes. So that was really like interesting to hear from your viewpoint and everything. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
So I guess our kind of like last question is just as like a final thing, what advice would you give to any girls, especially, you know, girls of color, and pursuing STEM and leadership?
Do it. First, don't stop. Don't think that you're not good enough. Don't let anything make you doubt yourself. I think one of my biggest regrets was I was in college and I loved chemistry. So I went all the way up to biochemistry for no reason, right? Like I didn't need that to graduate with a degree in computer science, right? And so my chemistry professor saw that I had took so much interest in it, and he was like, hey, there's this new biomedical thing that we're trying to do, and I want to do research over the summer. I would love for you to participate in that research. And we all know biomedical computing is huge now, right? So imagine if I would have been there 17 years ago. But anyway, and I was so nervous that I would not be good enough and that my professor would be disappointed in my level of contribution to the research, that I just like shook my head and said yes. And whenever he brought it up again, I acted completely uninterested, or like I hadn't heard him. I wouldn't follow up on it or anything. And I was like, we're just going to let this fade into the night. And he will never know that I'm not as smart as he thinks I am. Right? And I counted myself out. Right. And I don't know what I could have contributed to that. I'll never know, because I counted myself out, right? And so that is kind of like my message to anybody who wants to go in. Don't count yourself out, right? Keep trying, persevere. If you have the energy and the passion behind it, then prepare yourself. Work with people, get mentors, learn it, and the right opportunity will present itself, and don't walk away and count yourself out before you even try the opportunity. Don't do that. And rejection, if you do get rejected, rejection is not a value judgment on you. I applied for an internship with Microsoft and I was rejected. And then I ended up working there for 12 years. Right. So clearly I was good enough to be a Microsoft hire, and I didn't work there for 12 years and just skirt along. I kept getting promoted and going up and up every time, right? And so don't let rejection stop you. Prepare yourself. Don't count yourself out before you even try the opportunity.